Everyone, lock everything up. There's a burglar in my house.
Catherine Whitmore's gaze fixed on Frederick Grant, a black man in a gray janitor's uniform.
Don't move. Hands up, now.
She descended the stairs. The sound of her high heels was like a gunshot.
I know what kind of man you are. A stray dog eyeing my diamonds.
Madam, I'm here to work.
Shut up! You're a thief. Search him before he leaves. People like him can steal anything.
Freedy said nothing. Silent. Calm. She treated him like a criminal, humiliated him in front of everyone. And then she went even further. She set a trap for him. That was her mistake. Because what this man pulled out of his coat not only proved his innocence, it destroyed her entire world. But before we get to that moment, let me take you back to the beginning. Frederick Grant woke up every morning at 4:45. No alarm. His body just knew. The house was small, clean, nothing fancy. A 2-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood outside Richmond, Virginia. The kind of house where the porch light stays on, and the lawn gets mowed every Sunday. The hallway told a story if you looked closely. Old photographs, a younger Frederick in a dark suit, shaking hands with men in government buildings. A group photo with a dozen people in matching black jackets. A framed letter with an official seal half hidden behind a coat rack. None of it screamed anything, but all of it whispered something. His wife, Denise, stood in the kitchen pouring coffee into a steel thermos. You could be teaching at Quantico. Instead, you're mopping floors for people who don't know your name. Frederick smiled. That's the point, Dee. Nobody knowing my name. That's the first vacation I've had in 30 years. He kissed her forehead and walked out into the dark. The morning air smelled like damp grass and engine oil. His old pickup groaned when he opened the door. Talk radio murmured through the speakers. He drove 26 minutes through empty roads until he reached the Whitmore estate. 14,000 square feet of stone and glass perched above the James River. He parked in the staff lot, farthest spot from the entrance, carried his own cleaning supplies inside. 8 months on the night and morning shift, mopping, scrubbing, polishing. Simple work, invisible work. But Frederick was not a simple man. He noticed things others missed. A security camera with a blinking red light, active. Another with no light, disconnected. A misplaced vase. A new scuff mark on the baseboard. His eyes moved like they were cataloging evidence. Because for 22 years, that's exactly what they've been trained to do. Now, the woman who owned that house. Harrison Whitmore was a real estate billionaire, traveled constantly. He controlled the money. Catherine controlled the house, and she ran it like a kingdom built on fear. She inspected rooms wearing white gloves. She timed how long each maid took to fold a bedsheet. She fired people the way others changed clothes, fast, cold, without looking back. In 3 years, 9 employees were let go. 6 were people of color. The reasons were always vague. Attitude, carelessness, things going missing. Never specific, never provable. Because every one of them was handed a check and a non-disclosure agreement by the family attorney, Gerald Ashford. Sign here, take the money, disappear. Nobody fought it. Nobody could afford to. The head housekeeper, Alma Johnson, had survived 15 years by keeping her mouth shut. 63, white-haired, tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. But Alma had a secret. In her locker, behind a stack of folded aprons, she kept a notebook. 15 years of entries, dates, names, exact quotes. Every humiliation, every wrongful firing, every time a person of color was treated like they didn't belong. She never showed it to anyone, but she never threw it away either. On Frederick's first day, Alma pulled him aside. "Keep your head down around Mrs. Whitmore. Don't make eye contact on bad days, and whatever you do, don't be the last one in the building when something goes wrong." Frederick nodded, but something in his eyes told Alma he wasn't the type to keep his head down forever. Now, the brooch. Remember this. Catherine owned a diamond and emerald brooch, a family heirloom from Harrison's mother, $250,000. She wore it to galas and charity dinners. Between events, she left it wherever she pleased, the vanity, the bathroom counter, the kitchen island, unlocked, unguarded. She was careless because she had never faced a consequence for anything in her life. 2 weeks before everything happened, Catherine said at a staff meeting, "I want better locks on the East Wing. I don't trust the night staff." She looked directly at Frederick when she said it. Alma noticed. She went to her locker that evening and wrote it down. That brooch, and those cameras Frederick noticed on his very first day, were about to become the two most important things in this story. It started with a phone call. The night before everything fell apart, Catherine Whitmore was alone in her bedroom. Harrison was in London. The house was dead quiet, nothing but the low hum of the air conditioning, and the faint, rhythmic sound of Frederick's mop sweeping across the East Wing hallway 2 floors below. At 10:41 p.m., Harrison called. Catherine answered on the second ring. What followed was not a conversation. It was a detonation. Harrison told her he was reconsidering the prenup situation. He wanted to cut her monthly allowance from $200,000 to $50,000. He used the word restructuring. Catherine heard the word cage. She screamed. She pleaded. She threatened to call his lawyers, his business partners, the press. Harrison said nothing for 10 seconds. Then he said, "Good night, Catherine," and the line went dead. Catherine sat on the edge of her bed. Her hands were shaking. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts. The silk sheets felt cold against her skin. Her reflection stared back at her from the vanity mirror. Mascara smudged, jaw clenched. And right beside the mirror, sitting in its open velvet case, was the diamond and emerald brooch, glittering under the warm light, watching her like a quiet witness. That's when the idea came. She couldn't fight Harrison. He had the money. He had the lawyers. He had every ounce of power in their marriage. But she could take her rage out on someone who had nothing, someone who couldn't fight back, someone the world wouldn't believe even if he screamed the truth from a rooftop. Frederick Grant. She picked up her phone and texted Holloway. "Make sure those cameras in the East Wing stay off. We talked about this." Holloway replied in 14 seconds. Done. What Catherine didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the estate's parent security company, Sentinel Guard Systems, had quietly reinstated those cameras during a routine system update 3 weeks earlier. The firmware reset had reactivated every lens in the East Wing, every hallway, every angle, every frame, recording silently to an off-site server that Catherine had no access to, including the camera pointed directly at the supply closet door. At 11:12 p.m., Catherine left her bedroom. She wore a silk robe and carried the brooch wrapped in a white hand towel, one from the upstairs guest bathroom, not from the supply closet downstairs. She walked down the back staircase. Her bare feet made no sound on the cold marble. At 11:14 p.m., she entered the supply closet on the ground floor. Frederick's spare work jacket hung on a hook near the door, the one with his name tag stitched on the chest pocket. She slipped the wrapped brooch into the right pocket, carefully, deliberately. She adjusted the pocket flap so nothing was visible from the outside. She looked at the jacket one more time. Then she turned around and walked back upstairs. At 11:18 p.m., she poured herself a glass of red wine, sat on the edge of her bed, and smiled. A slow, satisfied smile. The trap was set. And Frederick? He had finished his shift hours ago, logged out with security at 10:05 p.m. He was home in bed by 10:40, a full 34 minutes before Catherine even touched the brooch. He had no idea what was waiting for him when the sun came up. 7 a.m. The staff assembled in the foyer for the daily morning briefing. 12 people in pressed uniforms, maids, cooks, groundskeepers, security. Frederick stood near the back, mop in hand, quiet as always. Catherine appeared at the top of the staircase, hair perfect, makeup flawless, white blouse buttoned to the collar. But her expression was something else entirely. Sharp, coiled, ready to strike. "My brooch is missing." The room went still. The diamond and emerald brooch, $250,000. It was on my vanity last night. It is not there this morning. She let the silence stretch. 5 seconds. 10. Long enough for everyone to feel the weight of what was coming. Then she raised her hand and pointed. The only person with unsupervised access to the East Wing last night was him. Every head in the room turned to Frederick. Frederick set the mop down gently. "Ma'am, I finished the East Wing at 9:48 last night, logged out at 10:05. The timestamps will confirm I didn't ask for your story." Her voice was ice. "Holloway, check his locker. Check his jacket. Check everything this man owns." Holloway moved fast. Too fast. Too rehearsed. Like a man who already knew every step of the script. He opened Frederick's locker. Nothing. Checked his duffel bag. Nothing. Then he reached for the spare work jacket hanging on the hook by the door. He slid his hand into the right pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in a white towel. He unwrapped it slowly, holding it up high so every person in the room could see. The brooch caught the fluorescent light. Diamonds and emeralds sparkled against the white cloth like tiny green and white fires. Silence. Total silence. 12 people stared. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. Catherine's face changed. The theatrical anger melted away. What replaced it was triumph. Cold, polished, rehearsed. The face of a woman watching her own plan land exactly where she aimed it. There it is, right there, in his jacket, in front of every one of you. She paused, let the moment sink into the walls. "I told you what he was." Frederick looked at the brooch. His eyes narrowed, not in fear, not in panic, in recognition. 22 years of investigating planted evidence had taught him exactly what this looked like. The towel was from the upstairs bathroom, not the supply closet. His jacket hung in an unlocked, open area anyone could access overnight. And he knew, with the certainty of a man who had built federal cases on smaller details than this, he never touched that brooch. "I didn't take that," he said, calm, steady. "Someone put it there." Catherine stepped closer. Her perfume filled the air between them, heavy, sweet, suffocating. "Of course you'd say that. That's what your kind always says. Every thief has an excuse." The word thief hit the room like a hammer on glass. Alma Johnson, standing in the hallway entrance, closed her eyes. Her fingers drifted into her apron pocket, where she always kept a pin. Catherine wasn't finished. She turned to Holloway. "Call the police, right now." But she didn't wait. She pulled out her own phone and dialed Gerald Ashford first. Gerald, the janitor stole my brooch. I want him arrested today. Felony charges, civil suit. I want to make an example out of this man. She hung up. Then she called 911. And when she did, her voice transformed. The steel vanished. In its place, a trembling, breathless whisper. A masterclass in performed victimhood. Hello? I need help. There's been a theft at my home, a very valuable item. The man who took it, he's still here. I don't feel safe. Please, hurry, please. She was standing 15 feet from Frederick when she said those words. He hadn't moved, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't taken a single step in her direction. But on that 911 recording, Catherine Whitmore sounded like a woman fearing for her life. 2 officers arrived in 18 minutes. Officer Wade Tillman came through the door first. Wide shoulders, loud boots, one hand resting on his belt, like he'd already decided who was guilty. Officer Scott Byers trailed behind him, clipboard in hand, eyes on the floor. Tillman scanned the room. He looked at the staff. He looked at Catherine. Designer dress, tissue in hand, tears glistening under the chandelier. Then he looked at Frederick. You the janitor? Yes, sir. We got a report of a felony theft, $250,000 brooch, found in your jacket. Tillman took one step forward. His boots were loud on the marble. You want to explain how that happened? Someone planted it. I'd like the security camera footage reviewed before anything else. Tillman didn't blink, didn't pause, didn't consider it. Turn around, hands behind your back. Officer, the cameras will show. I said turn around. Frederick turned, slowly. The cold steel of the handcuffs closed around his wrists. The metallic click echoed through the foyer, sharp, final, like a sentence before a trial. 12 people watched. Alma gripped the edge of a side table until her knuckles turned white. A young maid near the kitchen door pressed both hands over her mouth. Nobody spoke. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody said a word. Catherine stood at the foot of the staircase, arms folded, chin raised. She watched Frederick being led toward the front door. Not the staff entrance. The front door. She demanded it. She wanted the whole world to see. The gardeners along the driveway stopped their work and stared. A neighbor across the road stepped onto her porch, coffee mug in hand. She watched a black man in handcuffs being guided into the back of a police cruiser on a bright, clear Tuesday morning. The neighbor shook her head slowly, not in sympathy, in confirmation, as if she already knew the story before a single word was spoken. In the back of the patrol car, Frederick sat still, hands cuffed behind him, spine straight, eyes forward. The leather seat smelled like sweat and disinfectant. The metal cage separating the back from the front was scratched and dented, marked by the fingerprints of 100 people who had sat exactly where he was sitting now. Through the window, he could see Catherine standing on the front steps of the estate, arms folded, talking to Gerald Ashford, who had arrived in a black Mercedes before the police even pulled away. Catherine was already smiling. The gardeners had stopped working. They leaned on their rakes and watched the cruiser roll down the driveway. A woman walking her dog across the street slowed down, stared, then pulled her phone out of her pocket. Tillman drove. Byers sat in the passenger seat, staring at his clipboard. Then Tillman opened his mouth. You know what gets me? He didn't look in the rearview mirror. He just talked, like Frederick wasn't even a person, just a thing in the back seat. These people, you give them a job, you let them into your home, into your life, and this is what happens every single time. Byers said nothing. He shifted in his seat. His pen stopped moving on the clipboard. Frederick's jaw tightened. It was the first visible crack in his composure since this whole thing started. Not because the words surprised him. He had heard worse many times, from people far more dangerous. But because this man had a badge. This man was supposed to protect everyone equally. And he had already decided Frederick was guilty before he asked a single question. Frederick said nothing. He closed his eyes and breathed. At the station, things got worse. Frederick wasn't taken to an interview room. He was taken to an interrogation room. Bare walls, concrete floor, metal table bolted to the ground, a single fluorescent light buzzing overhead, one-way mirror on the left wall, dark, reflective, cold. Tillman sat across from him. No lawyer present, no Miranda rights read. Tillman framed the whole thing as a voluntary conversation, a trick Frederick recognized instantly because he had spent 2 decades teaching agents how to spot exactly this kind of procedural violation. Tillman leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Look, let me make this easy for you." Frederick waited. "I get it. You're in that house every night. You see nice things, things you can't afford, jewelry worth more than your whole block. It's tempting, right? It's human nature." Frederick's expression didn't change. "Just tell me what happened. Tell me where the rest of it is. Maybe we knock this down to a misdemeanor. Maybe you walk out of here tonight. But you gotta work with me." Frederick's voice was level. "I want to invoke my right to an attorney. And I want the security footage from the East Wing of the Whitmore estate reviewed before any charges are filed." Tillman laughed. Not a real laugh. A short, hard sound, like a door slamming. "Security footage? Lady of the house already told us. Those cameras have been down for weeks. Maintenance issue. So there's no footage to review, my friend. It's your word against hers." He leaned forward. "And between you and me, that's not a fight you're going to win." Frederick looked at him, and for the first time, just barely, just at the corners of his mouth, he smiled. Because he knew something Tillman didn't. Those cameras weren't down. He had seen the blinking red lights every single night he cleaned that hallway. Every single night, for 8 months. Those cameras were recording, and whatever they captured was sitting on a server somewhere, waiting. But Frederick didn't say this. Not yet. He folded his cuffed hands on the metal table and waited. Meanwhile, 26 minutes away, 4 officers pulled up to Frederick and Denise Grant's home. Gerald Ashford had done his work. Using the Whitmore family's connections, he secured an emergency search warrant in under 2 hours. The narrator needs you to understand, that speed is not normal. Emergency warrants take time. They require specific evidence. They require judicial review. This one was signed by a judge who belonged to the same country club as Harrison Whitmore. The same judge who co-invested in a Whitmore real estate deal 4 years ago. But none of that would come out until later. Denise opened the front door in her housecoat. Her eyes were red and swollen. She had been crying since Frederick's phone call from the station, the one call they let him make. The officers didn't wait for her to step aside. The first one through the door bumped her shoulder on the way in. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a hand on his belt and boots on her clean floor. What followed was 40 minutes of destruction dressed up as procedure. They pulled books off shelves and let them fall to the hardwood floor. Spines cracked, pages bent. They dumped dresser drawers onto the bed. Underwear, socks, reading glasses, a bottle of prescription medication, all piled together like garbage. They opened the closet in the hallway and found a box on the top shelf. Frederick's box. Inside, 22 years of commendations, certificates, photographs, and a folded American flag from a ceremony at FBI headquarters. One officer rifled through it with one hand. He picked up a heavy gold medal, Frederick's FBI Distinguished Service Medal, presented to him personally by the director in 2014. He glanced at it for half a second. Then he tossed it back into the box like it was a bottle cap. It bounced off the edge and fell to the floor. He didn't look down. He moved to the next room. They checked inside the toilet tank. They pulled up a corner of the living room carpet. They opened every cabinet in the kitchen and left the doors hanging open like broken jaws. Outside, the neighbors gathered. First one, then three, then six, standing on porches and sidewalks, watching police officers carry boxes out of the Grants' home. These were the same neighbors who waved hello every morning, the same neighbors who borrowed Frederick's lawnmower in the summer and brought Denise banana bread at Christmas. Now they just watched, arms folded, whispering. Denise stood in the middle of her ransacked living room. Her hands trembled at her sides. She looked at the books on the floor, the drawers dumped on the bed, the cabinet doors hanging open. Then she looked down and saw the medal on the hardwood floor. The Distinguished Service Medal, face down, gold rim scratched. She knelt, picked it up with both hands, held it against her chest. 34 years of marriage, she whispered. Not one blemish. Not one. They found nothing. No brooch, no stolen goods, not a single suspicious item in the entire house. It didn't matter. Gerald Ashford pressured the DA's office to file felony grand larceny charges. His argument was clean and cold. The item was found in the defendant's jacket pocket. The value exceeded $200,000. Under Virginia Code, that's a Class 5 felony, 1 to 10 years in state prison. Frederick was formally charged, fingerprinted, photographed, mugshot taken, front and side, holding a booking number under fluorescent light that made his skin look gray and his eyes look hollow. He posted bail using his retirement savings, $15,000, money he and Denise had set aside for a trip they'd been planning for 3 years. When he walked out of the station, Denise was waiting by the truck. She didn't say anything at first. She just held him. Then she pulled back, looked into his eyes, and said,
"They stepped on your medal, Frederick. They stepped on it and didn't even look down."
That night, Frederick sat alone at his kitchen table. The house was dark. Denise had gone to bed. The rooms were still wrecked from the search. Books on the floor, drawers still dumped, cabinet doors still open. They hadn't cleaned up. Neither of them had the energy. The kitchen smelled like cold coffee and silence. Frederick opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Beneath old case files and a stack of yellowed legal pads, there was a worn leather case. He pulled it out and set it on the table. He opened it slowly. Inside, a gold shield, FBI insignia. Engraved on the back, SSA, Frederick R. Grant. He held it under the kitchen light, turned it over in his hands, ran his thumb across the letters of his own name. "I didn't want to do this," he whispered. "I was done." A long pause. The refrigerator hummed. "But you didn't leave me a choice, Mrs. Whitmore." He picked up his phone, dialed a number from memory. No contacts list, no scrolling. Just 10 digits he'd known by heart for 20 years. It rang 3 times. A voice answered, deep, steady, familiar. "Frederick Grant, 22 years and you never once called me this late. What happened?" "I need a favor, Nathan, and I need it fast." The line was quiet for a moment. Then Nathan said, "Tell me everything." And Frederick did. What happened next, in the next 48 hours, was the thing that turned Catherine Whitmore's entire world to ash. And honestly, she earned every second of it. The man on the other end of the phone was Nathan Coleman. 20 years ago, Nathan was a junior agent, nervous, green, fresh out of the academy. Frederick trained him, mentored him, walked him through his first federal case, stayed on the phone with him at 2 in the morning when the case almost broke him. Now Nathan Coleman was a senior official at the FBI's Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C., one of the most powerful men in federal law enforcement. And Frederick had just told him everything. Nathan was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke. Let me make sure I'm hearing this right. A billionaire's wife planted evidence on a retired supervisory special agent, filed a false felony report, had his home searched, had him booked and mugshot taken, and the whole system just went along with it. That's what I'm telling you. Give me 24 hours. Nathan didn't need more than 12. First, he contacted Sentinel Guard Systems, the third-party company that managed the Whitmore Estate's camera infrastructure. He obtained a federal subpoena for all footage, every camera, every angle, every timestamp from the past 72 hours. The footage came back within 6 hours, and what it showed was devastating. The East Wing cameras were fully operational. They had been recording the entire night. Catherine lied. Holloway lied. At 11:12 p.m., Catherine Whitmore was captured leaving her bedroom in a silk robe, carrying a small object wrapped in a white towel. At 11:14 p.m., she entered the supply closet, opened the right pocket of Frederick's spare jacket, and placed the wrapped brooch inside. At 11:18 p.m., she returned to her bedroom, poured a glass of wine, and sat on her bed, smiling. And then, the text message. Pulled from Holloway's phone records under subpoena. Catherine to Holloway, 10:58 p.m. Make sure those cameras stay off. We talked about this. Holloway's reply, 10:59 p.m. Done. Premeditation, coordination, consciousness of guilt, all in high definition. Nathan called Frederick back that evening. Brother, we've got her, on camera, in high resolution. And it gets worse, for her. This isn't just a false report. This is a racially motivated frame-up with a documented pattern of prior conduct. We're talking federal civil rights charges. I'm sending 2 agents from the Richmond field office. Detective Sullivan from Richmond PD has already been looped in. Frederick hung up the phone. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time, holding his badge in both hands. Then he stood up, opened his closet, and pulled out a dark navy suit he hadn't worn in 3 years. Day 3, 8:15 a.m. A black SUV pulled up to the Whitmore Estate gates. The morning sun reflected off the windshield, so the gate guard couldn't see inside. He called up to the house. Catherine came to the front door in a silk robe, coffee in hand, hair pulled back, no makeup. She was not expecting visitors. The SUV doors opened. Frederick stepped out first. He was not wearing a janitor's uniform. He wore a dark navy suit, white shirt, no tie. His posture was straight, shoulders squared, hands still. And clipped to his belt, catching the morning light like a small gold sun, was his retired FBI badge. Behind him, Detective Brenda Sullivan from Richmond PD, and 2 FBI field agents from the Richmond office, dark suits, credentials visible. Catherine froze in the doorway. The coffee mug stopped halfway to her lips. She saw Frederick. Confusion hit first, then recognition, then anger. I have a restraining order pending against you. Get off my... Frederick stepped forward. He unclipped the badge from his belt and held it up. Steady, unhurried. The gold shield caught the light and threw it back across the porch. His voice was quiet, controlled, and absolutely devastating. Ma'am, my name is Supervisory Special Agent Frederick R. Grant, retired, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Civil Rights Division. I spent 22 years investigating people who do exactly what you did 3 nights ago. Catherine's lips parted. No sound came out. And I need you to know, before Detective Sullivan reads you your rights, that we have the security footage. All of it. Including the part at 11:14 p.m. where you walk into the supply closet and put your own brooch into my jacket pocket. The coffee mug slipped. Catherine caught it with both hands, but the coffee sloshed over the rim and splashed across her white robe. She didn't notice. She didn't move to clean it. Every drop of color had left her face. Detective Sullivan stepped forward. Catherine Whitmore, you are under arrest for filing a false police report, obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, and conspiracy to deprive an individual of their civil rights under federal law. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Catherine grabbed the doorframe. Her knees buckled slightly. Her voice came out thin and cracked. I want my lawyer. I want Gerald. Frederick stood on the porch. Still. Calm. The same stillness he had shown in the foyer when she grabbed his collar and called him a thief. But this time, the handcuffs weren't for him. He looked at her one last time and said, quiet enough that only she could hear, "You picked the wrong janitor, Mrs. Whitmore." At the station, Catherine Whitmore tried everything. First, the medical defense. I was sleepwalking. I have a condition. I didn't know what I was doing. Detective Sullivan pulled up her medical records. No history of sleepwalking, no prescriptions, no diagnosis of any kind. Denied. Second, the memory defense. I was just moving the brooch for safekeeping. I forgot I moved it. This is a misunderstanding. Sullivan slid a printed screenshot across the table. Catherine's text to Holloway. Make sure those cameras stay off. We talked about this. You don't text your security chief about cameras at 10:58 p.m. because you're sleepwalking. Denied. Third, the victim defense. Frederick must have threatened me. I was scared of him. I didn't know what to do. Sullivan asked her to describe the threat. Catherine couldn't. She stumbled over her words, changed her story twice in 40 seconds. No prior complaints against Frederick existed. 14 staff members gave statements describing him as quiet, respectful, and professional. Denied. Finally, the power defense. Catherine sat up straight, wiped her eyes, and said, "Do you have any idea who my husband is? Do you know what this family has done for this city?" Sullivan looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Ma'am, that's exactly the kind of statement that makes this worse for you, not better." Catherine was booked, fingerprinted, mugshot taken. The same station, the same camera, the same fluorescent light that had turned Frederick's skin gray 2 days earlier. But this time, the person standing under that light was wearing a silk robe with a coffee stain on the front. She was held overnight, bail hearing scheduled for the morning. 1 night in a holding cell, concrete bench, steel toilet, a wool blanket that smelled like industrial detergent. For a woman who had never been told no in her entire adult life, that one night hit like a freight train. Holloway didn't last much longer. He was arrested at his apartment the same evening. 2 FBI agents knocked on his door at 9:15 p.m. He answered, in sweatpants and a t-shirt, holding a beer. The beer was still in his hand when they read him his rights. Under interrogation, Holloway broke in 90 minutes. He confessed to everything. Catherine had instructed him to tell police the East Wing cameras were non-functional. She told him to find something in the janitor's things, though he claimed he didn't know she had already planted the brooch herself. Then came the part that cracked the case wide open. Holloway admitted this wasn't the first time. He had helped Catherine manufacture evidence against two previous employees, Terrence, a black groundskeeper, and Estella, a Latina cook. In both cases, items were discovered in their belongings after Catherine had access to the areas where their things were kept. In both cases, Gerald Ashford showed up within hours with an NDA and a check. Holloway's confession was recorded, every word. It became the foundation for expanding the federal investigation far beyond Frederick's case. Back at the estate, the walls were closing in from every direction. Alma Johnson walked into the Richmond police station the next morning. She carried a plain black notebook, worn at the edges, soft from years of handling. 15 years of entries, dates, names, direct quotes, every incident of humiliation, every wrongful termination, every time a person of color was treated like a suspect in their own workplace. She set it on Detective Sullivan's desk and said, "I should have done this a long time ago. I was afraid. I'm not afraid anymore." 3 former employees were contacted by investigators within the week. Terrence, Estella, and a third, a black housemaid named Dorothy, who had been fired 2 years earlier for misplacing a silver tray. All 3 agreed to testify. The NDAs they had signed were challenged in court as contracts executed under duress and in furtherance of fraud. The judge voided every single one. And then there were the neighbors. The same people who had stood on their porches watching police carry boxes out of Frederick's home. They learned the truth. Several left flowers and handwritten notes on the Grants' front porch. One neighbor, an elderly white man who had watched the whole search in silence 3 days earlier, knocked on Frederick's door. He stood on the porch, hat in his hands, eyes wet. "I stood there and watched. I didn't say a damn thing. That's on me. I'm sorry." Frederick looked at him for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. "It's not too late to do the right thing. It never is." What started as one woman's lie became the biggest civil rights case in Virginia that year. The FBI's Civil Rights Division opened a full federal investigation into Catherine Whitmore's conduct. The scope went far beyond Frederick. Investigators examined every termination at the estate over the past 3 years, focusing on the 6 employees of color who had been forced out under vague accusations. They located 4 of them. Terrence, the black groundskeeper, described being accused of stealing silverware he'd never touched. He was pulled into Holloway's office, searched in front of 2 other staff members, and handed an NDA by Gerald Ashford before the end of the day. He signed it because he had a daughter in middle school and couldn't afford a lawyer. Estella, the Latina cook, told a nearly identical story, accused of pocketing kitchen supplies. No evidence, no investigation, just Ashford with a check and a document. She signed it in tears at her kitchen table. A third former employee, Dorothy, a black housemaid, described something worse. During a private confrontation in the laundry room, Catherine had called her a racial slur. When Dorothy reported it to Holloway, she was fired the next morning for insubordination. Ashford arrived by noon. The pattern was undeniable, exposed, documented, and now federal. Gerald Ashford's role didn't go unnoticed. He hadn't just drafted NDAs. He had actively suppressed complaints, intimidated vulnerable workers, and used the Whitmore family's wealth as a weapon to silence anyone who might have spoken up. His conduct was referred to the Virginia State Bar for an emergency ethics review. His law license was suspended immediately, pending a full investigation. Then came the judge. The judge who had signed Frederick's emergency search warrant in under 2 hours, an extraordinary speed that had raised red flags from the beginning, was investigated by the Virginia Judicial Conduct Commission. It was revealed that he and Harrison Whitmore were members of the same country club. They had co-invested in a commercial real estate venture 4 years earlier. The warrant was ruled procedurally invalid. The judge was removed from the bench pending further review. One by one, every pillar that had held up Catherine Whitmore's world was being pulled out from underneath her. And then the media arrived. Investigative reporter Carolyn Moore from Richmond's largest television station broke the story in a 3-part series that aired over consecutive evenings. Part 1 covered Frederick's case, the planted brooch, the arrest, the footage. The centerpiece was a split-screen image that would become the defining visual of the entire scandal. On the left, Frederick in his gray janitor's uniform, holding a mop. On the right, his official FBI commendation portrait, suit, badge, American flag behind him. Same man, 2 completely different worlds. The image went viral within hours. Part 2 told the stories of the victims, Terrence, Estella, Dorothy, and 2 others who came forward after the first segment aired. Each told a strikingly similar story. Accused without evidence, fired without process, silenced without choice. Part 3 exposed the system, the Whitmore family's money, Ashford's legal machinery, the compromised judge, Holloway's complicity. Moore laid out the entire architecture of power that had allowed Catherine to destroy lives without consequence for years. Catherine's mugshot was published nationally. Cable news picked it up. Legal commentators dissected the case on every platform. Civil rights organizations issued public statements. Social media erupted. The story trended for 6 consecutive days. Harrison Whitmore moved fast. He released a statement through a new attorney, not Ashford. I am deeply disturbed by the actions attributed to my wife. I had no knowledge of these incidents. I will cooperate fully with investigators. Within 10 days, he filed for divorce. The real reason wasn't irreconcilable differences. It was the $4.2 million in potential civil liability he was trying to distance himself from. The trial was held in federal court in Richmond, Virginia, Judge Eleanor Davis presiding. The courtroom was standing room only. Carolyn Moore sat in the press gallery. Frederick and Denise sat in the front row, side by side, hands folded, quiet. The charges were read. Filing a false police report, obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, conspiracy to violate civil rights under 18 U.S.C. Section 241. Frederick was called to the stand. He spoke the way he had done everything throughout this story, calmly, clearly, without raising his voice once. But every word landed like a hammer. He described the collar grab. She called me boy in front of 12 people, people I worked with every day. He described the handcuffs. I spent 22 years putting handcuffs on people who committed terrible crimes. I never imagined I'd feel them on my own wrists for something I didn't do. He described the home search. My wife stood in our living room and watched strangers dump our life onto the floor. One of them picked up my Distinguished Service Medal, the one the director of the FBI handed me personally, and tossed it back into a box like it was a piece of trash. It fell on the floor. He didn't even look down. Then he paused, looked directly at the jury. Denise didn't sleep for 3 nights. She sat in the dark and cried. Not because she was scared for me. She knows I can handle myself. She cried because she believed this country had moved past this, and she found out it hadn't. Silence in the courtroom. 2 jurors wiped their eyes. A woman in the gallery pressed a tissue to her mouth. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty. All 4 counts. Judge Davis handed down the sentence. 5 years federal prison for conspiracy to violate civil rights. 3 years state prison for obstruction and evidence tampering, to run concurrently. $750,000 in fines. 300 hours of mandatory community service with civil rights organizations upon release, a permanent ban on employing domestic workers, and mandatory restitution to every identified victim. Catherine stood motionless as the sentence was read. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She stared straight ahead at nothing, like a woman watching her own life collapse in slow motion and realizing there was no one left to call. Holloway's case was resolved separately. He pleaded guilty to obstruction and accessory charges. 2 years probation, a $50,000 fine. His security license was permanently revoked in the state of Virginia. He read a public statement outside the courthouse. "I followed orders I knew were wrong because I was afraid of losing my job. That's not an excuse. Frederick Grant deserved better. Every person Mrs. Whitmore targeted deserved better. I'm sorry." Gerald Ashford's law license was permanently revoked by the Virginia State Bar. A separate criminal investigation was opened into his role in facilitating the NDAs and suppressing evidence of Catherine's pattern of abuse. The compromised judge received a formal censure from the Virginia Judicial Conduct Commission and was permanently removed from the bench. Every single person who had helped Catherine Whitmore hurt innocent people faced consequences. Every one. 3 weeks after the verdict, Frederick Grant stood at a podium inside the Richmond Police Department headquarters. The chief of police stood beside him. Cameras flashed, microphones crowded the edge of the table. Reporters filled every seat. The chief spoke first. His voice was measured, but heavy with something that sounded close to shame. "We failed, Mr. Grant. We failed the principles he spent his career defending. The officers who responded to that call did not verify basic evidence. They did not review available footage. They accepted one person's word over another's based on assumptions that have no place in law enforcement. We are implementing immediate reforms to ensure this never happens again." Officer Wade Tillman, the man who had cuffed Frederick, mocked him in the cruiser, and refused to check a single camera, was placed on unpaid administrative leave pending a full departmental investigation. 2 weeks later, he resigned. He never made a public statement. Officer Scott Byers, the man who said nothing, did nothing, and watched it all happen, received a formal reprimand for failure to intervene. He remained on the force, but was reassigned to desk duty. Frederick and Denise settled the civil case out of court. Harrison Whitmore's attorneys wrote the check, $2.8 million. Frederick didn't celebrate. He didn't buy a new house or a new car. He and Denise sat at their kitchen table and made a plan. They used the money to establish the Grant Foundation, a legal defense fund for domestic workers and service employees who face wrongful accusations, racial profiling, or employer retaliation on the job. Pro bono attorneys, case support, public advocacy, a phone number that someone like Terrence or Estella or Dorothy could call and hear a voice on the other end say, "We believe you, and we're going to help." Frederick was invited to speak at the FBI National Academy, then at a national law enforcement conference on racial bias in policing, then at 3 universities. He said yes to all of them. The ripple kept spreading. Catherine Whitmore's case became a landmark reference in civil rights training materials for law enforcement agencies across Virginia, and eventually across the country. Instructors used the security footage, the timeline, and the text messages as a case study in how institutional power enables racial targeting. The Virginia state legislature introduced a bill dubbed the Grant Act in every headline that strengthened penalties for racially motivated false police reports and created an independent review process for search warrants issued in cases involving domestic employees. It passed unanimously, not a single opposing vote. Terrence used his share of the civil settlement to start a landscaping company. Estella opened a catering business. Both were interviewed by Carolyn Moore in a follow-up segment titled After the Whitmore Estate, The People Catherine Whitmore Tried to Erase. Alma Johnson retired from domestic work the same month. She began volunteering at the Grant Foundation 3 days a week. Carolyn Moore asked her why. Alma smiled, tired, relieved, free, and said, "I kept that notebook for 15 years because I was too scared to speak. Frederick gave me the courage to finally open it." And Frederick? The final image is this. Morning light in a small kitchen, coffee in a steel thermos, Denise sitting across the table, reading the newspaper. She looks up over her glasses. "So, no more janitor jobs?" Frederick laughs. A real laugh. Warm, deep. The first one in this entire story. "I don't know, Dee. I kinda liked the mopping. It was the coworkers that needed work." The badge didn't save Frederick. Let me say that again. The badge did not save Frederick. The truth saved him. The footage saved him. The badge just made people listen. And that's the part that should keep you up tonight. Why does a black man need to flash a federal shield before anyone takes his word seriously? So here's my question, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments. If Frederick had been just a janitor, no badge, no FBI career, no phone call to Washington, do you think those cameras ever get checked? Do you think Catherine Whitmore ever sees a courtroom? Tell me, because your answer says everything about where we are right now. If this story made you feel something, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, because the next one hits even harder. Justice isn't supposed to depend on who you used to be. It's supposed to depend on what's true. Let's keep fighting to make that real. I'll see you in the next one.
Here's what scares me most. It's not the people who hate you. It's the people who have enough power to make up a crime, put it in your pocket, call the police, and watch the whole system believe them. Not because of the evidence, because of who they are and who they think you are. And that's the most dangerous kind of lie. The kind that comes with the badge holder's voice and Manson behind it. The kind nobody questions, because the questioning it means questioning people with money, and nobody wants to do that. But here's what I also know. Lies don't last. They can't. You can plant whatever you want in someone's pocket. You can hold whoever you want. You can smile while an innocent person gets handcuffed. But the truth doesn't care how rich you are. It doesn't care how powerful you are. It sits there, quiet, patient, waiting, and when it comes down, no amount of money can put it back. So, if someone is lying about you right now, hold on. The truth is coming. It's always there. Like, share, subscribe. Real stories, real justice every week. And remember, you can frame an innocent person. You can fool the system, but you cannot fool the truth. And the truth never forgets.